The Psyche, written and read by Christopher Halton. It had existed through aeons from when naught was. It was in the air and in the sea. At times it trod the earth as a wretched sign of humanity, and at others it drifted intangible, without odour or touch. On rare occasions it was all of these at once. Thus it lived through many lives and many ages, seeking absolutism through the power it drew from its own persistence. It took infinite pleasure in the many facets of death and disaster it wrought within the minds of humanity, and yet to them all it was a god. Within the human mind it existed as the psyche itself, and the more evil and complex that psyche became, the more energy it fed the entity, driving it onward toward an infinity that was its apotheosis and its crown of ascendancy. As a respected scientist, I knew it lingered and savoured the evil it perpetuated, even when humanity did not. In weaker minds, it chose instruments through which to enact its will, sometimes even catapulting them to greatness, where it could unleash misery and murder on a scale unheard of in human history. From primordial ritual sacrifice, its expressions evolved into political and racial dogmas, dividing humanity in service of a thirst that would never be sated. It knew that men could never regard themselves as truly equal, for they fashioned a social order that granted superiority to some and indifference to others. This template was repeated endlessly, and whatever the pretext, whether clothed in good intentions or naked evil, the end was always the same, as mankind forged ever greater instruments of destruction to fulfill its design. Possessing such knowledge is one thing, acting upon it is another. It was by a bitter stroke of fortune that I discovered the creature had taken residence as a psychiatrist in London in the early days of January 1890. I knew it inhabited this body, as it always bears a faint misted aura in its human forms, a thing I was gifted to perceive as a child by my grandmother Isadora Moncrief. She raised me after my parents died under circumstances never satisfactorily explained, and upon her deathbed in 1868 she passed this vision to me. I did not squander the gift. On innumerable occasions I recognized the mark of the entity in others and relieved it of its vessels in ways that invited no scrutiny. Overdose medications, sudden collapses, accidents of the sort that befall the unfortunate every day. I took care, and the deaths were never judged suspicious. There came a time in 1888 when discretion proved insufficient. The influence appeared prevalent in the East End of the city, among women of ill repute, and I was drawn into measures that could no longer be passed off as misfortune or chance. I came to understand that subtlety works only while the mind remains yielding. Once it hardens, gentler methods lose their effect. In this case, the removal was more visceral and required the use of a surgical knife on 5 of them. With time, it became apparent that this was an error of judgment. The methods I adopted served more to reinforce my confidence in the theory than to resolve the problem. The influence did not recede. Nothing was corrected. Still, I did not abandon my conclusions. I adjusted them, reasoning that the failure lay in application, not principle. The entity endured, as it always had, moving on when its vessels were destroyed, leaving me to consider with some unease whether in attempting to deprive it, I had merely learned how best it survived. And so I stand outside a 3-storied terraced townhouse in Kensington, London. It is the home of Sir James McFarland, an eminent psychiatrist, who is also a Member of Parliament for a London district and a man of great social and political influence. He was a rising figure in his own group and likely, it was said, to become a future leader in Her Majesty's government. Unlike the others, it had control of this, proved a worthy adversary, and one that would be difficult to get close to due to his social circumstances, and the fact that he was surrounded by his own familiars, who protected his presence wherever he went. However, I was also a respected figure in science and needed just the right opportunity to forge an introduction that would enable me to gain his acquaintance, and when the opportunity arose, to dispose of him and the evil that lay within. Sir James was seated in his study when Mortimer entered, bearing an introduction card upon a silver salver. "Begging your pardon, sir," the butler said softly, "but there is a gentleman in the hall who requests a few moments of your time." Sir James looked up from the London Times with a faint scowl. "I hope he is worth the interruption," he said. "This is the only moment of quiet I have today." Mortimer raised the salver. Sir James glanced at the card, and his expression changed at once. He removed his monocle, a flicker of interest crossing his face. "Richard Moncrieff," he murmured. "Yes, indeed. Please show him in, and have the kitchen send up some tea. Biscuits as well." Mortimer inclined his head and returned shortly with the visitor. Sir James rose to greet him warmly, shaking his hand and gesturing toward a pair of armchairs near the fire. "Mr. Moncrieff, I've read some very favourable things about your work. It's a pleasure to meet you at last. To what do I owe the honour?" "Although I'm but a chemist, Sir James," Moncrieff replied, seating himself, "I have developed, shall we say, a growing interest in psychiatry, particularly where it concerns the darker impulses of men. I recall reading a paper of yours in the Lancet that touched upon the subject." Sir James smiled, a little self-conscious. "That was some years ago. My observations were drawn largely from my time in the asylums, an attempt to understand what distinguishes the more violent inmates from the rest." "I wondered," Moncrieff said, "whether such tendencies might arise from imbalances in naturally occurring chemical substances, ratios that, when disturbed, incline a man toward violence." "That may play its part," Sir James replied, "but I am inclined to think upbringing and ancestry carry equal weight." They shared a brief smile before a maid entered with tea and biscuits. Conversation drifted easily after that, scientific speculation giving way to lighter matters, until Sir James glanced at the clock and rose. "I'm afraid duty calls," he said, "but I've enjoyed our discussion very much. Perhaps we might continue it another time." "I would welcome that," Moncrieff replied. Sir James nodded. "Then we shall arrange it." On leaving, I felt confident that, having made Sir James's acquaintance, I could now observe him more closely. It was unfortunate that matters had come to this, but as I understood it, my responsibility extended beyond any single individual. If the influence I perceived were allowed to rise within the upper levels of government, particularly within the Empire, it would pose a risk far greater than the loss of one life. We met again for dinner at his private gentleman's club in Soho, of which I was also a member. Conversation was limited during the meal, as was customary, and afterwards we withdrew to the lounge for brandy and cigars. Sir James was an agreeable company. Were it not for the faint haze I continued to observe about him, I might have regarded him as a friend rather than an adversary. We discussed politics and recent events, and in the course of the evening he invited me to spend the weekend at his estate in Hertfordshire, where his wife, Lady McFarland, was in residence. The days would be spent shooting pheasant, he said, and the Saturday evening playing a rubber of bridge with neighbouring friends Lord and Lady Ambrose. He asked that I bring a companion. I told him I was unmarried, and he accepted this without remark. He left shortly thereafter, accompanied by two men he introduced as his personal protection. He remarked with some humour that he was in no condition to travel alone. I returned to my apartment to consider the opportunity this invitation presented, and so it came to pass that I arrived at the McFarland estate one Friday afternoon in September, conveyed by a hansom cab from the railway station at Hertford. The weather was mild as we drew up before a Queen Anne-era house of some distinction. A footman relieved me of my luggage, and Mortimer, Sir James's butler, greeted me and led me inside. He showed me to a guest room on the upper floor, comfortably appointed and fitted with its own bathroom. After unpacking and changing for dinner, I descended the main staircase and joined Sir James and his wife in the drawing-room. They were both in their middle years, relaxed in manner, and insisted that I address them by their given names. Lady Fiona was composed and personable, and spoke easily as though we were already acquainted. It was then that I noticed it, the same faint haze I had observed before, present not only about Sir James, but about his wife as well. The discovery unsettled me, though it did not alter my resolve. If anything, it clarified it. Plans were already taking shape by the time we sat down to dine that evening, and I found myself watching them closely, attentive to signs that might confirm whether they too were bound to the same influence. Dinner passed agreeably, followed by a long conversation over port. Nothing was amiss. I retired thereafter and slept well, rising early to dress appropriately in a Norfolk jacket and +4s for the morning shoot. The day was clear and the exercise familiar. Birds were driven into the air by the estate staff, and I acquitted myself competently enough. More than once my thoughts strayed, only to be checked again by the same conclusion. Appearances mattered, and any course taken would need to withstand scrutiny. Impulse, I reminded myself, had never served the wider purpose. That evening we were joined by the Ambroses, neighbours of long standing and owners of a sizable estate nearby. Lord Ambrose spoke readily of his years in India, of skirmishes and service, illustrating his accounts with the crutes and cutlery, to the mild amusement of the table. Lady Ambrose followed with stories of the climate and of the difficulties, as she put it, of managing servants in such conditions. It was then, beneath the soft light of the oil lamps, that I noticed it again. The same faint haze was present not only about Sir James and his wife, but also about the Ambroses. The recognition unsettled me more than I cared to admit. If this influence was as pervasive as it now appeared, then its reach was broader and more entrenched than I had anticipated. After dinner, over polite conversation, we retired to the drawing-room, where the staff had set up a large baize-covered card table and dining chairs, and we settled down to play a rubber of bridge. As I was the odd man out, I was partnered by the local doctor, Arnold Chilvers, a rather agreeable chap who, thank God, did not have the same aura as the others. We played for some time in good humour. It was only later, as the evening wore on, that I began to feel unwell, as I lost focus, and all around me was a swirl of sound and voices that echoed rather than resonated, and I woke slowly, aware first of the smell of polish and stone. My body lay heavy beneath me. I attempted to move, but I could not. I tried to speak and failed. A shaded oil lamp burned overhead. Sir James stood beside me. Dr. Chilvers was nearby consulting a notebook. Mortimer waited by the door. "You're awake," Sir James said. His voice was calm, weary. Dr. Chilvers stepped forward. "The sedative I gave you will pass," he said. "For now, it's best you remain still." I fixed my eyes on Sir James. "You've been unwell again," he continued. "We hoped that by giving you some independence with your own apartment, you would not get into trouble and would come to realize that you had been living under a pretense of your own imagination. But it appears from the copious notes found hidden in your home that you had degenerated towards a far sinister and dangerous condition, and dare I say, a threat to society." Sir James sat. "Oh, my son, everything that brought you home to us was based on a lie manufactured by you. You are not a scientist of repute, you are a dangerous psychopath. and should this ever be reported to the authorities, it would destroy my reputation and an opportunity to serve my country. My heart began to race as I attempted to comprehend what I was being told. "We found the poisons," Dr. Chilvers said, "and the notebooks. You may have thought you were careful, but you have incriminated yourself and de facto your family name." Sir James met my gaze. "Sadly, you were protected by my name, by my silence, but I hoped by my belief that your delusive behaviour would pass. But I never imagined you, my only child, as a monster." The door opened softly. Mortimer hesitated. "Sir," he said, "shall I prepare the room?" Sir James nodded. Then, after a pause, "See that Master Richard is made comfortable." The room was opened only after Sir James's death, when the house passed to distant relatives, and its contents were catalogued. It lay at the end of a short corridor behind a door long kept locked. Inside was little, a narrow bed and a desk. No windows, no signs of disturbance. A desiccated body was found seated in a chair with its hands folded. An investigation was launched by the police and the coroner's office, and it was recorded as the body of a late middle-aged man. A birth certificate attests to the identity as that of Sir James's only son Richard, who was thought to have moved abroad. Why he was locked in a room was never discovered. The inquest recorded no crime. The newspapers briefly noted the discovery, describing the occupant as a reclusive invalid maintained privately, as was sometimes the custom. What he believed himself to be was not recorded, and his remains were later cremated, and the room was kept locked. The end.